Welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm your host, Doug Sharp.
Your co-host, Rich Gear here as well. And as well, we have a special guest, one of my favorite people, Kerby Rials, who's back from Belgium. How many years were you there?
8 years, and about 9 almost.
And you were there, and before that you were in Russia for,
and 1 year in Switzerland before that.
Oh, you were in Switzerland, okay.
Yeah.
Wow. He speaks French fluently.
Well, I had to learn a little German in the last few weeks. So my wife and I took a Viking River Cruise, and it was from the Netherlands all the way through Germany, Austria, and Hungary. And so I experienced several different cultures during that time. And one of the things we did was visit a lot of the cathedrals and some of the castles, and the biggest observation that I made when I was in Europe was that there was a lot of trappings and baggage and formality and pageantry that we sort of shed when we came over here to America. Mm-hmm. And we left all that behind, and for a very good reason. There's the people who actually started America, the Pilgrims and the Puritans and people like that, came from the Netherlands and from they actually were sort of banished in England, and they came over here because they were experiencing some persecution. And so they had an opportunity with the new translation of at that time was the Geneva Bible and eventually the King James Bible, that a lot of the things in America started with their Protestant faith and based. And so that was one of the things I noticed when I went over to Europe, is that they still maintained a lot of those traditional trappings that one of the things that I remember, we were visiting one of the castles, and of course they had their torture chambers, and that apparently, they told us this was actually part of the Catholic religion, to purge the people of their sins, so that they would actually go to heaven. You would torture them, and they'd receive all their penance for their sins.
Doing them a favor.
They're doing a favor. Yeah, so thank you very much. But and I noticed that that whole spiritual atmosphere in Europe had that superficiality with it. It was all this patched. A lot of it's the cathedrals and the palaces and things like that are just absolutely beautiful. But with our experience, and we grew up in the revivals in the 70s, where we had everything was personal relationship with Jesus, mm-hmm. and we knew Jesus and learned to listen to his voice and everything like that. But in Europe, I attended the Catholic Mass, and it had all the pageantry where you had the beautiful organ and the cathedral ceilings and all the Baroque decorations and everything, and that was supposed to bring you into the presence of God. And yet, of course, we bring with us the presence of God when we go to church, and so I had my own little worship there. But it really wasn't something that was brought by the priests or anything like that.
Well, I know in a half-an-hour show it's kind of hard to go through the entire history of the Christian church, 2,000 years of it, but it is an amazing thing that very early on the church became hierarchical, and it caused problems. And churches were revival, like in Asia Minor. It was reported up to 90% of the people were converted by the end of by the beginning of the 2nd century. By the end of the 3rd century, they said, "Yeah, still hold services even though nobody shows up." And they went from these little house churches, these little small little things, because they were being persecuted all over. And then they got, basically when Constantine said, "Oh, that's a state religion." Suddenly, they built all these churches, and they were basically almost the same way that the pagan temples used to be before they came in. Now, I'm not saying that they were pagan necessarily, but I'm saying there's a lot of stuff like that happened, and Europe has a lot of that stuff. Of course, even in the present day, they still hold on to the idea of a state church, where the government supports it.
Yeah, in the beginning,
we never had any of that here.
When we visited these cities in Germany, they were all city-states. They had a prince bishop that was appointed to oversee all the religious and state affairs within that little region. And some of these palaces were, just out of this world in terms of opulence and beauty. But here, all this power was in this principalities. You talk about powers and principalities, and I think they were, a lot of them was just set up by Satan, in his realm. And it's this doctrine of the Nicolaitans, where you have the hierarchy. You appoint different people you have to go through in order to get to God.
Yeah, we don't exactly know what that was, but it literally means to conquer the laity. Okay, Nikos and Laetan. And that was very early on. You'd raise up people up above you, and that got to be, of course, obviously, and the Pope was the big kahuna, but you had bishops and all these people, and they were over you. And that, we have kind of gotten out of a lot of that. We still have, in America, obviously, we have old line denominations, and they still have hierarchical governments to them, but they're not nearly, even the Catholics, they say, yeah, we'll submit to the Pope as long as they agree with what I think he's going to do. But what I'm amazed at, Doug, and Kerby could tell because he was there, is how secular, you have a history of tremendous revivals and awakenings in the Reformation period, from John Huss to John Wesley. You had Zwingli and Melanchthon and John Knox, and you had, of course, Calvin and Martin Luther, and just one after another. And these people were really, and they were coming out of a 1,000 years of really despotic church rule, quite frankly, okay? But they still held on to a lot of things. It reminds me of the book of Revelation where it says, yeah, you did this right, but you still do this. You still hold on to this, that doctrine of the Nicolaitans, for instance.
Europeans like to, I'll just tell you very frankly, those of you who are watching, some of you may be European, please don't be offended. But in general, I think most Europeans would agree with what I'm about to say. That is, they kind of look down on America. They think we're kind of cute, and also a little bit dangerous,
the upstairs,
and a little bit backwards, that we are, fanatically religious, and they think we're anti-scientific. So I encountered that on a train once. I was on my way to England on the Channel, and on the super fast. Yes, I took the super fast train from Brussels right under the English Channel, and you come up in England. It's amazing. But on this trip, I'm sitting next to a Dutch gentleman, and he is a scientist. And we get to talking, and I mentioned all the evidence for creation, intelligent design, and I could see that he was trying not to laugh. He wasn't really that close to laughing, but I could see the way he's thinking, I'm dealing with a person who's not quite normal. He's thinking that in his head, and he's trying to explain why we're so benighted and so deceived. So that is the attitude we have to deal with when presenting intelligent design in Europe. Evolutionary theory has so dominated, it so permeates European culture that you start off from a negative position. It's not a position of equality. I think what we need is to have some good debates, some forums, get some books printed and distributed in Europe, and I think we might see some change.
But Doug, Kerby, that's one thing we're getting when we talk about the hierarchical thing. They are very, we have adhered to, but not like they're, based on what you're telling me, and I suspect this is very strong, the history of hierarchy in the church, in the kings, whether they're secular or religious. They are used to the people up here telling them what's right,
yes.
And they don't think for themselves.
That's true.
And that's a very difficult time. We get mad when it happens here, because human nature is human nature. We always think, when Jesus chose out the Pharisees, and reality is people like the Pharisees. They like people telling them what to do, so they don't have to think about it. That's really what it amounts to. And you've got this codified by hundreds of years, Kerby, of hierarchical thinking, where the top-down mentality tells you what's right. And so what they rely on is authority, not truth.
And right now the evolutionists are in the ascendant. They're
Right.
They're worshipped as the gods of this world, and so you have the problem that you have to then take down that principality. And I think it has to be done in prayer, and I think you probably know that even if miracles happen, which we seem to see quite a bit of, seen quite a bit of in our lives, that doesn't necessarily change the person's life.
Do miracles happen in Belgium? Where you at? Did you see miracles when you were there?
We did, and just like Doug was saying, that it doesn't necessarily mean anybody's going to change. What I realized in looking at that is, the miracle is somebody has a felt need. I need prayer, and they will come to you for prayer. Once their felt need is met, once God has healed them, they think, fine, see you later, and they're not interested.
They're like the 9 lepers as opposed to the one.
They got what they want. Now, God, don't bother me. I've got other things to do. Now, we saw some remarkable miracles. One was a lady named Lola. She was an African, and came to our meetings, very cheerful kind of gal, but not walking with the Lord. You know what I'm saying? God was just simply there when she needed it. But after her needs were met, she wasn't interested. Well, she came to our prayer meetings, got on her knees twice at 2 different meetings, said, please pray for me. I'm scheduled for back surgery. And so she was very earnest about this. So we laid hands on her, prayed for her healing. She went in for the surgery, came back and pretty quickly, within a few days, and said that they had opened up her back, looked at her back for the surgery, and there was nothing wrong with her back.
What did they think was wrong with it before?
I think there was like a slipped disc or something. I don't remember. I don't remember exactly what was wrong. But there was nothing wrong. And she came back and told us, and we said it to the whole church, that doctors couldn't find anything wrong. And yet we saw no change in her life. Another guy said he was an atheist because he had his 2-year-old had fallen out of a window and died. And he was probably an atheist before that. But he said now he was certainly an atheist because of the death of his son. And so he came to one of our meetings. This is many years after the death of his son, for our music concert. Well, he'd been drinking, and he was a little bit drunk when he got there, and the concert was over. He was that drunk that he missed the whole concert.
He missed the whole concert.
So he gets there, and we have these Norwegian Christians. The Norwegians are off the charts, wonderful Christians. A lot of them are just incredible. And this particular group believes in healing. And so Frederick was the leader, and he said, can we pray for you? And I'm translating for him. And what happened was he wanted to go back and get his hearing aid because he couldn't hear us too well. And I said, well, let's pray for your hearing. And he thought that was hilarious. And this is the reaction you get from Europeans in general. When you talk about healing, talk about intelligent design, creationism, it's a joke. They can't believe you actually would propose such a thing. But he laughed and laughed until we insisted. We laid hands on him, prayed for him, and his hearing got better. And then Frederick had a word of knowledge about a pain in his shoulder. He said, Jean-Claude, do you have a pain in your shoulder? He said, yes. He said, how did you know that? He says, I haven't even told my wife about this. And he said, well, God revealed it to me. Can we pray for you? Now, before he said, no, don't pray for me. Now he says, please. So we laid hands on him. Pain immediately went away. His eyes just got big.
Yeah.
No change in his life. No change. So miracles, sometimes people say, I had a Muslim in Europe once tell me that. Well, if I saw miracles, then I'd believe. I disagree, my friend, because I've seen plenty of people have had the miracles and they go on the same way. The problem is the heart. And they don't want to accept the miracle.
Reminds me of a great story when Earl told me this. It was a classroom at Michigan State University. and we euphemistically call it Heresy 222 because they tried to. It was supposed to be the New Testament 222, and they were telling you why. And they'd go from the prophecies about why Isaiah 7:14 what didn't say virgin, it said young woman, and that, all that kind of stuff. And I always had some good things on it, but it was a class when it was a class. I wasn't in this one. Earl was in this one, and there was a guy up there, and I can't remember what his name was. Glenn Stuckey, I think it might have been his. He says, because what he did was they called reaction reports, and he had to do something. It didn't matter. Earl played a song, and it was right when the Jesus Freak movement was going on back in the early '70s. And he goes, I want everybody to come. He says, I want to pray for a miracle today. And right in the middle of class, that's my reaction report. Has anybody got a document? This one when leg lengthenings were like a big thing was going on. Does anybody have a documented medical limb that's shorter than another? And the guy says, yeah, I got one. It's at least two. It was a couple inches shorter. It was you can see he had special elevator shoes anyway. Well, come on up here. And then, and Earl, he's kind of hiding out in the back. He goes, oh my gosh, Lord, I hope you do something because this is really bad if it doesn't happen, So anyway, it's just so human. It was so funny. But he come up, this guy had the boldness of the Holy Spirit at that time. And he comes in there, and the professor's in there, Dr. Anderson is his name. And I can't think of the guy. Anyway, so he lays on, and there was this guy, and he was Jewish by culture, but he's really an atheist. Mm-hmm. And he goes, oh, and he goes, okay, the name of Jesus, and all of a sudden everybody goes, oh, and they jump back like this, and the professor, his face got white as a sheet, and the Jewish guy ran out of the room like, there's no way, and it was miraculous, but again, neither of their lives changed. Neither of their lives changed, but other people were. But the thing is, so I don't say that miracles are totally without value. Otherwise, we wouldn't pray for them. I mean, obviously there's need, but it does respond. Some people do, and we were talking earlier before the show started, how some cultures respond to the miracle, and some really don't. And it seems like European-based cultures really do not that much,
No, they don't. And one of the ironies here is God is tremendous, because we sent missionaries to Europe, not a lot of results. We sent them to Africa, have had tremendous results. Mm-hmm. Well, now what's happening, as you know, there's an influx of African refugees to Europe. They're coming over in boats in every number of ways, illegally and legally. Yeah. And the largest church in Belgium right now, in terms of attendance on a Sunday, is a Protestant church, and it's almost all African. Yeah, it's called New Jerusalem Church. Wow. And they're just moving, and the African Christians, most of them Pentecostal, Spirit-filled, charismatic, are really on fire. Mm-hmm. And they're boldly speaking about Jesus. They're not ashamed of the Lord at all. And they've had an impact in Belgian culture. So we've gone over with our Western approaches. It hasn't had as much of an impact. Africans are coming over. Again, this is like God did an in run. Mm-hmm. And they're already in Africa, in the Belgian culture, and they are making a difference.
Yeah, so I remember when Nicole, my daughter-in-law, came here, mm-hmm. and she was not again, but John, and the way they do the student things, you're not supposed to try to influence people. Well, John, he took her to the church we went to, and I ended up having some conversations with her till 2 and 3 in the morning. Of course, she fell in love with my son and married him, but she said she went back to Germany. It was a hard time finding places, but she did find one. And there are churches in Germany and they're really alive, but it's a tough nut to crack because the culture is steeped in those. I mean, it's almost like those who've been given much, and that's what I worry about this country too. Those who've been given much is required, and when you don't live up to it, sometimes the mantle, you just do not want to have Ichabod.
I know that, again, this might be offensive to some of our viewers who might be European, but let me just say it. If you read the Old Testament, you see God does deal with nations. He uses cataclysms, catastrophes, disasters, and wars to shake up a culture and to get people's attention. I mean, you look at the history of Israel, again and again, God is saying, oh, look what you're doing. I've got to shake you up. You guys are headed in the wrong way. Well, if you look at European history in the last 100 years, what do you see? Incredible death, destruction, war, famine, violence, horrible, horrible things, the Holocaust. Naturally, we'd have to think, if you look at the biblical understanding of how God deals with nations, that He's dealing with Europe in the same way. Oh, yeah. He's trying to shake the Europeans up. To them, our Christianity is for stupid people. It's backwoods, uneducated, fanatical stuff. And God is telling the Europeans, maybe you might want to take another look. Jesus Christ is not a joke.
Well, as you said earlier, Darwinian thinking has really influenced the cultures over there quite a bit. I mean, it's so strong. I don't know. Maybe you could tell me this question: Do the governments restrict the teaching of creation as much as they try to do here?
You know, I've never heard of anyone even teaching creationism or intelligent design. I think it's not even an issue. It's not even a blip on the radar screen. It's just not there. It's considered a joke. And so the irony here is Europeans are so devoted to science. And it was a Belgian scientist who was a priest, a Catholic priest, who discovered the Big Bang Theory, which supports the biblical approach that the universe, that the universe was created. Before that, Sir Fred Hoyle, the British astronomer, said the universe has always existed, the steady state theory. And of course, a Belgian scientist said, no, the biblical view that the universe was created in an instant is correct. So we see science is continually pointing to the biblical account as correct. And yet Europeans have trouble with that.
Yeah, and it's interesting that the evidence, if you look at the scientific evidence, and that's what got me going down this road, is that I was doing some of my own experiments and coming up to an impasse on the evolutionary road that is right at the beginning, where you're trying to take chemicals and create life. And when I found that it was, you have irreducible complexity, and that's sort of like you have to have all these different parts where you have enzymes and DNA and RNA and all these different pieces for that whole process that goes ribosomes.
So what I like the irreducible complexity, but I like the specified complexity. I think who's the guy that came up with that? Dembski, yeah. Which kind of went up. It's not only that not only do you need all these parts to everything work, but these parts can't work for anything else. They only work for, unless everything works, nothing works. And it's specified for this particular thing. And so there are things they can't even figure out how it can even get there.
Fun though, Rich, it really is. I think when you realize you have science on your side, real good science is on our side, and I like to challenge the Europeans. There's so many assumptions. They assume you don't know what you're talking about. They assume you're not really educated. So when you present to them science, hard science, they're lost. One day I went across the street to the little newsstand across from where we lived in Bastogne, and I bought a newspaper from the gal, and I had a tract in my pocket, as I usually have, and I just knew that I needed to talk to this gal, because there was an article about our church in the paper. Oh. So I showed her the paper, and I said, yeah, this is our church. And then I said, of course, are you a believer? She said, no. And I knew that was what her answer was going to be. She's a young lady, about 22. And I said, so you don't believe in God? She said, no. I said, why is that? And she looked, you can see the rusty wheels turning in her head. And she said, I don't know. She didn't know why she didn't believe. Wow. And that's the case with Europe. All of this information that we have, that people are watching and seeing this good information, I love irreducible complexity. It certainly is a conundrum for an evolutionist. They just have never considered any of this stuff. Yeah. I'd like to mention one that Ken Ham, I just read this today, I loved it so much. You take a mosquito, it's flying around, it's live, splat. Okay, now all the chemicals necessary for that mosquito to live are still there. Yeah, that's right. Well, but the mosquito's quite dead. So that goes back to the primordial soup that evolutionists love to talk about. Well, maybe with all these things, all the elements are there. Well, you got the chemistry, but it's still dead.
Yeah, I like what Ian Juby did in one of his videos.
Yeah.
He said he set up a blender.
It was.
And put a frog in it, okay?
Oh.
And he did some trick photography, so he turns on the blender and the frog just goes to mud.
I'm sure you know animals were harmed in the demonstration here, you know what I mean? Yeah, disclaimer.
And what he did was he actually put some tomatoes and other things, green stuff in there, and so the mixture looked like it was, but he says, now there were really no froggies hurt in this little demonstration here, but it gave that picture.
But the point is well taken, and that's the thing. We used to say, like, yeah, put a dead animal in a microwave oven. You know, you put all the energy you want, any kind of energy, gamma radiation, microwave radiation. It's not. Nothing's gonna. Electricity, you know.
Hold on, it worked for Frankenstein.
Yeah, well, that's a movie, you know. There's a lot of things too. It's like you can look at a guy turn into a bat in a Dracula movie too. But animals don't turn into human beings. They don't morph into them. Things are what they are, and there are fixed lines. Yeah. In movies, you can do all kinds of cool stuff. And one time there was a young girl. I was teaching a youth group. This is many years ago, and I like science fiction. I enjoy it. It's fun. But I said, how come someone's like good science fiction is all evolutionary? And she looked at me and goes, well, you can make up anything you want. And I went, oh. Yeah. And then she got real upset at herself. I said, no, I didn't mean it that way. I said, no, that's exactly the way. With evolution, you can make up anything you want. Yeah. Any kind of movie, anything. But with a biblical reality, there are certain things that are true and there's certain things that are not true. And that's the difference in there. And I guess that, you know, that's an appeal is you really want to, when you want to talk to people, to say, you know, when you talk to the one young girl, I don't know why I don't believe. She's believing in what we believe is a lie. The Lord says, come to me, you know.
Well, what it is spiritual inertia.
Yeah, it's spiritual inertia, but even more than that is there's doctrines of demons. Mm-hmm. There is a spirit. There are, like you said, principalities and powers. Yeah. There are things in heavenly places warring against our mind, mm-hmm. to cloud us, to let us not. You know, I like it. I think of that movie. We got 1 minute left.
Could you speak to the people watching that are not necessarily convinced that God is in their lives?
Well, I was going to go to that. I don't know if we're getting kind of the wrap-up time, but basically for those who really would like to know, God challenged you, says, come to me, you know, ask me, and see if I will not come to you. And this is a really open thing, because, you know, we can tell you all the great answers, give you all the evidences, we give you all the reasonable things, but the fact of the matter is, open your heart, and He will step up, and He will bring you to Himself. Take the first step.
Yeah, ask Him to give you something in a way that you will understand.
Yeah,
and He will personally and specifically meet your need in that manner.
But when He greets you with a miracle, don't be like the one gal that got a miracle and didn't change. Come to Him so He can make you like Himself. Absolutely. Yeah.
We'll see you next time on Revolution Against Evolution. We hope you enjoyed our show.